So I'm Matt Hall. I'm the Gasogene of the Watson's Tin Box of Ellicott City Scion. And at our last meeting in August 2026, we were lucky enough to have Kem White give a presentation that people will understand why we're recording when they watch it. Uh, Kem White was one of the founders of our Scion. Kem received his first copy of the complete Sherlock Holmes as his 16th birthday present during the first Nixon administration and has been an avid Sherlockian ever since. Kem was Gasogene #1 of Watson's Tin Box and is one of the Scion's founding members, along with Paul Churchill, Stephen Mary Clarkson, and Rog McCaslin. He's Napoleon 187 and the Six Napoleons of Baltimore, who are celebrating their 80th anniversary this year. Kem has participated in many of the Saturdays with Sherlock Holmes at Baltimore's Enoch Pratt Free Library, and in fact, was at the very first one in 1980. Kem's lived in Howard County for more than 45 years and recently retired from Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, where, to the best of his knowledge, he was the only Sherlockian on staff. So, Kem, big wonderful to sort of hear you walk us through the founding and the early years of Watson's Tin Box.
Oh, sir, it's my pleasure. Um, the just want to make a little intro in that Watson's Tin Box is a Sherlockian science society, and kind of got started back in the late '80s, early '90s. And the two principal founders of Watson's Tin Box are Paul Churchill and Steve Clarkson. You'll hear more about them in a sec. But throughout this brief, you're going to be hearing their names quite a lot. And so we initially thought that Watson's Tin Box would be kind of like centered in Ellicott City, but it's grown since then. And we have members from many Maryland counties and from several states. So with that introduction, I'll get started. This quote is from Paul Churchill. Sherlockians are by their very nature weird, and my guess is that there isn't a Sherlockian in existence that would disagree with that statement. Down below there in the lower left, that's our Watson's Tin Box logo. That was drawn by Paul Churchill right at the very start of our Scion's existence, and you'll see more of his drawings throughout this brief. A little disclaimer. All reminiscences, facts, dates, names, and stories in this presentation are true. I mean, bear in mind that these are 35 years ago, but we are talking about my memory. So if they're not true, they should be. Down the lower left there, you'll see like one of the drawings that Paul did for a book called An Irregular Pictionary, 40 Words for Sherlockians. It was written by Chris Redman and illustrated by Paul Churchill using his characteristic drawing technique, his cartoons. And Paul was an avid punster. And so most of these cartoons are going to have a pun or a play on words in some way or another. And you can see down there it says, the trouble with this last reminiscence, Watson, is that your readers will actually argue whether it's pronounced bow or bow. Now, another caveat, I'm going to assume that the folks listening to this are familiar with J. Finley Christ's story abbreviations. He came up with a code that people use to refer to them in writing and in my case in this presentation. And if you're not, go look to the end of this presentation and they're listed there. Steve Clarkson was one of the founding members. In fact, he was probably a principal founding member, and he said back in 1991, I am sure that Watson's Tin Box will in time have its share of hoary chestnuts, which will undoubtedly cause new members to wonder, how in the world did this get started? Then you and I can chuckle in our gray beards at their puzzlement. So here I am, a hoary chestnut, going through some of the early days of Watson's Tin Box. And this is another one of Paul's cartoons from the Redman and Churchill book. Believe it or not, he didn't intend it, but this is actually a really good caricature of Steve Clarkson that you see here. So, founding members, there were really 6 of us. Mark Churchill, who is Paul Churchill's son. Paul Churchill, who was a member of the Baker Street Irregulars with the invested name Corot, although at the time of our founding he was not a member yet of the BSI. Mary Clarkson, Steve Clarkson's wife. At the time of our founding, Steve was, in fact, a member of the Baker Street Irregulars, and his invested name was Morris Hudson, Rod McCaslin, and Kem White. And you'll hear more about these folks as I run through these slides. I picked this cartoon on the right because it shows like sort of a pun on Holmes's great hiatus, from the time he fell into the Reichenbachs till he reappeared in the empty house. And I too had a great hiatus from Watson's Tin Box. I was around for the formative years, but then I had, kids and a career and other things to do. And I kind of stepped away, and it was only recently that I came back. And when I did, I was asked to do a presentation. So forewarned is forearmed. Don't go on hiatus, or else they'll make you do a PowerPoint. Present at the creation. Yes, I was. Kinda present at the creation. Paul Churchill, and you see him in caricature there on the right. And that's a remarkably good likeness, by the way. Like if you ever see photographs of him, he looks just like that. He was a longtime Latin teacher at Howard County Centennial High School. That is back in 1990, that was one of the 8 high schools that were in existence in Howard County. There are actually currently 13 high schools in Howard County currently. So Howard County has gotten a lot more densely populated, and it's grown a fair amount. And in 1988, Steve Clarkson's stepdaughter, Mary Clarkson's daughter, was his student. And being a good teacher, on Halloween, he wore a deerstalker to work, because teachers wear costumes on Halloween, unlike normal employees. And the daughter saw it. And they started talking, and the daughter instantly thought to herself, hey, man, you have got to meet my stepdad, because he was like really into the stepdad. Steve Clarkson was really into Sherlock Holmes, and so was Paul. Even at that time, back in 1988, Paul was already a dedicated Sherlockian. He was wanting to form a Sherlockian discussion group, and so the daughter put Paul and another Centennial teacher, Rod McCaslin, in touch with Steve so that they could form a group of like-minded Sherlockians. Now, just coincidentally, my wife, who's not a Sherlockian, was also a teacher at Centennial High School. And I knew Paul vaguely, kind of, sort of, from Centennial staff parties, and we would occasionally exchange Sherlockian pleasantries. Time passed, but Paul remembered me. And so when Steve and Paul and Rod McCaslin decided they were going to really, bite the bullet and get organized, they included me. We had 2 organizational meetings, one in September 1989 and the second one in December 1989, before holding our first official Scion meeting on March 26, 1990. I'll talk about the order of the stories that we discuss in a moment, but at the March meeting, at our very first meeting as an organization, we discussed the Musgrave Ritual. At the second organizational meeting, we actually discussed the Gloria Scott, and you'll see why that pertains in just a bit. It's where to meet. I actually think that this is something that all Gasogenes wrestle with. It was certainly something I wrestled with when we were getting started. The organizational meetings and the first meeting were at a restaurant in Howard County called Shannon Saloon. It is in the Village Green Shopping Center up on Route 40. And it is actually one of my favorite restaurants still. They have good food, and it is definitely a place to dine if you are a serious old person, because it seems like the clientele there has got a lot of snow on the roof. But Shannon's proved unsatisfactory. It was kind of an open dining room. We couldn't really, talk out loud, and I know Paul and Steve were smokers, and that got in the way in Shannon Saloon. So for a couple of meetings, we moved down to Bare Bones, which is in the St. John Shopping Center, also on Route 40. Our May and June meetings in 1990 were held there, but that actually turned out being worse than Shannon Saloon. It was just a big open dining room. We didn't have big tables, and It just really didn't work out. So we moved to a place in Old Ellicott City called the Phoenix Emporium, which you see here, and we had a few meetings there, like our July through December meetings in 1990 and a February 1991 meeting. But the Phoenix Emporium was actually really popular with a young crowd, and it got loud, and we had a hard time discussing things, and so it too became unsatisfactory, and we had to find a fourth place. Turns out that the Phoenix Emporium has moved up Main Street a little ways to higher ground. It's now called Phoenix Upper Main, and this building that you see here is actually gone. Like they tore it down as part of Howard County's flood abatement program. And that fourth place was Bippy's Pub, which was out west on Route 40, and we met there for a long time. I have some memorabilia that includes Diane Noth commenting that she was Gasogene 5, commenting that we were meeting Bippy's Pub, So we met there for a number of years. Turns out that Bippy's Pub is now closed, and it's closed permanently. Naming of our scion. We started out with the agency of Sherlock Holmes. That came first, and we decided that agents or members were going to be agents of Sherlock Holmes. Not terribly original, if I do say so. That might have been my idea. I don't really recall it. I kind of noticed, like in my Gasogene notes, that I had written stuff down about it. It had had an upside. Holmes refers to this agency in a couple of times in the Sussex Vampire, and he refers to a small but efficient organization in the disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax. But, like I said, it wasn't terribly original. It was kind of similar to the clients of Sherlock Holmes, which was the Scion in Philadelphia. And ultimately, we left the selection of the Scion name up to our founder, Paul Churchill. But we did use the agency of Sherlock Holmes on the first meeting announcement, which you see here. I sent this out, in advance of the meeting. March 26, we had it at Shannon's Pub. Some interesting aspects here on the agenda. We were still discussing what to call ourselves. We were also discussing how to get the word out. The Howard County Times was around then. I don't know if it is anymore, so we consider that. We weren't really sure how to get the word out, but we knew we wanted to grow. And so we kicked around a few ideas, and there we are discussing the Musgrave ritual. This was back in the days before we even had area codes attached to phone numbers. And as you can see, this is all on paper. Things were done on paper via snail mail. Email really wasn't a thing, or if it wasn't a thing for most people. Peter Blau also cautioned that the agency or names similar or already scion names, so we ultimately chose Watson's Tin Box. So we had a unique name. It was what Paul wanted, and we had our second meeting on May 7th, 1990, and that was our first with our current scion name. Selection of first off Gasogene and other officers. Well, we literally, and I mean literally, drew straws. So like Steve grabbed a whole bunch of straws from the waiter. He cut one that was short and held them in his hand. We each drew one, and it wasn't my, dashing good looks. It wasn't my Sherlockian bona fides. It was the fact that I got the short straw that caused me to be the first Gasogene. Steve actually demurred as Gasogene. He preferred to be Torquemada. He wanted to be the guy that prepared the fiendish quizzes and, tortured, so to speak, the quiz takers. But he did observe that there are some characteristics that are desirable in a Gasogene, to wit, the willingness and capacity to attend virtually all meetings, a pawky sense of humor, advanced knowledge of the canon, and occasionally the hide of a rhinoceros. And I don't think in 35 years that has actually changed. We all agreed that a one-year term for Gasogene was appropriate, and after the drawing, Mary Clarkson volunteered to be the commissionaire. But the offices of Tantalus and commissionaire, which I think actually means something in the Baker Street Irregulars, kind of died out. I don't today have actually like those officers in place, only the Gasogene. A few random points. Our meetings are on Monday. And why is that, you ask? Well, Shannon Saloon didn't take reservations, still doesn't, and Monday is a slow night. So we kind of had our organizational meetings in that first Scion meeting on Monday, and we went from there. Why do we use the Baring Gould order of the stories and not some other order? I actually thought we should use the order that you find in the complete Sherlock Holmes, but Steve was adamant that the Scion adhere to Baring Gould's chronology, and so I think we have, like to this day. We go just follow that story order. In August, our story was the adventure of the Devil's Foot, and in September it'll be whatever one Baring Gould decided was after that. He also insisted that Watson's Tin Box not depart too far from the BSI manner of doing things, and I don't think we have. We certainly can express our originality, but I think like anyone from another scion who attended our meetings would find things familiar. Like I said earlier, we kind of envision Watson's Tin Box as being a thing in Ellicott City. It's grown beyond Howard County to include folks from many states and or several states and many counties. BSI dinner contributions. Because Steve was a member of the BSI, he thought it appropriate for us to prepare a souvenir for the BSI dinner attendees. We sent them up or brought them up and distributed them, and that way, like the BSI members had a sense of who we were. And we started off with pins. I know the very first pin was red. The second one we had was blue. You can see them there. We then decided to use matchboxes to create this faux Watson's Tin Box. And you can see it there. That's actually a matchbox. I still have mine. It's still filled with matches. It's really tiny. And I do remember like sitting in Paul Churchill's living room and gluing these silly pieces of paper onto the matchbox and getting him ready to send up to New York. There's the back of it. Compliments of Watson's Tin Box of Ellicott City. Some Vestas for you. In year 4, when Steve Clarkson was Gasogene, we had this genuine faux check, and you can see there that Paul Churchill, like a member of the American Association of Check Collectors, he's certified that's a genuine faux check signed by John H. Watson for £3, 2 shillings 6 pence for storage of his tin box in Cox & Co. We sent up a nice little letter accompanying the faux check. You can kind of see what we're actually kind of growing. You know, Steve Clarkson was the Gasogene in year 4, but we've got myself, Bruce Eberle, and a few others. You know, more than the 5 or 6 that we started out with in year 1, and in year 5 we sent up this really nice photograph of John Watson's writing table. Turns out that this writing table geographically is coincident with Paul Churchill's living room, but it's got a lot of stuff in here, and if you spend some time perusing it, you'll actually see, you know, things that come directly from the canon. And Diane Knaus sent up a little Christmas card kind of thing, you know, with compliments of the season from Watson's Tin Box. And this is year 5, and you can see we're growing even more. You know, we have about 24 folks that were sending up greetings to the Baker Street Irregulars in their in their meeting in 1995. And then we have this mug. I actually think we didn't send this. That seemed like too extravagant, but maybe we did. I just don't recall. And so that was like a cool Watson's Tin Box mug that some of us have. The first annual banquet of Watson's Tin Box. This is like, at least among us, among the members, is a popular and well-known event. The first one was January 28th, 1991, and at that time, the banquet and the Inquisition were not called the Mycroft as they are today. That had to come with the second award banquet. There was a handsome souvenir program, which contained the bill of fare that included such delicacies as red-headed leek soup, Bruce Partington submarines, mixed vegetable alkaloids, and Colonel Sebastian Moran's air trifle. As I said earlier, Paul and was an inveterate punster, and he created the bill of fare and cooked all the food for that first meeting. We covered 11 stories, starting with the Gloria Scott, Musgrave Ritual, Study in Scarlet, Speckled Band, Resident Patient, Noble Bachelor, Second Stain, Ragged Squires, Scandal in Bohemia, Man with a Twisted Lip, and the Five Orange Pips. We didn't actually go through a Study in Scarlet. Steve decided we were just going to talk about the short stories, but for the purposes of this quiz, he included it. And you'll notice that there are only 9 meetings that were held between inception and the Canonical Inquisition, and we included the Gloria Scott, which was at one of the organizational meetings. Paul actually drew up this wonderful map out to his house out there in Curl Canny, and there's all sorts of little Easter egg kinds of things on this that are fun to look for. I especially like this one up here, Eldersburg International Airport. I can't recall if there's actually an airport there, but probably is. But there's this great map. Didn't have GPS and your phone back in those days. Here's early membership. This was taken in September 1994. You can see Paul here on the left sitting there and Steve Clarkson right next to him. We have Bruce Eberly, who was Gasogene 2, next to Steve. Then we have Rod McCaslin, Les Moskowitz, a couple of folks who I don't know who they are. I can't remember their names. They're probably one of these people listed down here in the membership roster. I actually did the membership mailings and wrote software in Fortran to print up the mailing labels. Over here is Lana Santos. She was a Gasogene. So was Diane Kanath, her husband Bill Roby, and then Jim Smith. So you can see we're growing, and this is the interior of Bippy's Pub. Steve was just probably the best punster I've ever encountered. Paul was probably the only one that could compete with his wordplay. I could not. Wasn't a chance that I could. And since this isn't a Sherlockian presentation, it's always we always have an inquisition of the spectators of the audience. And these next questions are drawn from a collection of Sherlockian puns that were contained and written by Steve in the Mycroft quizzes for the 1991 to 1994. And I picked them out of this reference. They are puns from stories that we discussed at Watson's Tin Box in 2026. So, the idea was they would be, the stories would be fresh in people's mind. So we have the first one from the Norwood Builder. What good luck charms did John Hector McFarlane have? I never would have gotten this. I rarely got any of Steve's puns. Well, John Hector McFarlane had a pair of rabbit feet. From the Veiled Lodger, what would lead us to believe that Mrs. Ronder was a fan of American football? This one is really abstruse, I think. She told Holmes, I miss very little of what passes in the world. From the Missing Three-Quarter, why might we think that Godfrey Staunton had strange bedfellows? Well, Overton said that Staunton had been laid up with a hack. From the Abbey Grange, this is my favorite. Why was Holmes so interested in the third wine glass? For sentimental reasons.
That is brilliant.
Yeah, and if you're not a Sherlockian and these seem really silly, well they are, but I'm not going to explain them. Go read the stories and you'll get them. Finally, the last one from this month's story, The Devil's Foot. In what context might we find seaweed upon the Cornish heath? In the name of Dr. Moore Agar. I'll be honest, I did not get that when I saw it. I had to kind of Google what that possibly could mean. Turns out that agar is a jelly-like substance made from red seaweed. Again, very abstruse, and I'm sure I didn't get it when it was on the quiz. As I said, Paul was a really gifted cartoonist. He illustrated the Chris Redman Irregular Pictionary book. He drew this, which was kind of our first logo. This appeared on the very first meeting announcement. This is kind of like Sherlock Holmes giving folks the side eye. He also drew the logo we're using currently. This drawing of Watson's Tin Box. You know, you can see down here below, like it says Cox and Co. Late Indian Army. So that was pretty cool. Got papers hanging out. Try as I might, he actually was nice enough to lend me these cartoons, and I was able to take them to work and scan them. And try as I might, I couldn't keep them. Like I kind of kept forgetting to bring them, and this kind of thing. But he kind of pressed me to like give them back to him, and so I did. I gave them back to Paul. I actually don't know the whereabouts of either one of these, the originals of either one of these anymore. What I do have is this. And along about the time we started Watson's Tin Box, I got interested in rotisserie baseball, which is kind of like fantasy baseball. It's just a way of enjoying baseball and gambling kind of like all at the same time. And I asked him to draw me a logo for my team, which I decided to name the Amateur Mendicant Society. And he drew this. And I have the original of this. It's hanging on my wall. And, it's like a baseball guy, but with some Sherlockian aspects to it. Well, if you're an engineer, like I was, your most important slide in your slide deck is your get off the stage slide. And this is my get off the stage slide. So we're in the home stretch. And at the time I was wrapping up my year as Gasogene of Watson's Tin Box, I kind of like was talking to Steve, and I kind of suggested that, I wasn't in the same, category as Paul or him, that they were sort of in the pantheon of Sherlockians, and I was a lesser Sherlockian. And he wrote me a letter, and he said, "Allow me a gentle reproof. Sir, there is no such thing as a lesser Sherlockian. This tenet is the sum and essence of our world, where it is always 1895 and where the game is ever afoot." And that was in a letter he sent me back in 1991. So I just leave that. There are no lesser Sherlockians. So no matter where you are in your Sherlock Holmes, journey, you're a Sherlockian. So I was presented with the obligatory paperweight, and I leave you with this. 35 years on, Watson's Tin Box is still afoot. So that's it.
That is brilliant. Thank you, Kem.
Yeah, one last thing I would like to point out. I have a bunch of sources listed here at the back. Got some pictures of Paul further on, but they're not part of the brief. But Paul's obituary appeared in the Baltimore Sun in November 13th, 2008. And two things I really liked about the Baltimore Sun was Jock Kelly's columns on Baltimore and Baltimore history and Baltimore traditions. They were really great. I also really, really enjoyed Fred Rasmussen's obituaries, and if you've ever read these, you know how good they are. And Paul's obituary was actually written by Fred Rasmussen, so I encourage everyone to go online and hunt it down and read it, because it was really a nice obituary.
Thanks, Kem. That's fantastic. This leads me to ask. I've got two questions, even just looking at the sources. So they're kind of interconnected. So you were Gasogene in 1990, right?
Yeah.
So just for the average person watching this now, how did you run a group back then? I mean, no email, I assume, no cell phones. How are the practical things done? Communicating when a meeting was, all that kind of stuff.
During at least that first year, I would prepare the announcement. Just like this. Yep. And I usually did it at work, because at the time I didn't have a home PC. And at work I could use the word processing software that I had. This may have actually been done in WordPerfect rather than Microsoft Word. And so I pulled together the meeting announcement. The program, that was pretty much me. That was me thinking up, okay, here are some things we should be talking about. One of the more interesting things, Matt, a while ago you were asking about, learned presentations and what they were. I've got the meeting announcements from when I was Gasogene, and learned presentations started after me.
Yeah,
we didn't have enough membership or enough expertise to make learner presentations worthwhile. So it was all mail. I mailed them out.
Yep.
At the time, it was only like, what can I say, like 7 or 8. It eventually grew. You can see like I have the mailing the database for the mailing list, the roster. So there's a bunch of folks
Ah,
there, right? And so every month I would print up labels that uh, went out to these folks. And when we actually started using email as the preferred medium for communications, I really can't say. Um, yeah, but it was snail mail. Um,
and
that
the
was
odd
that
land,
was
what we would call now a landline telephone call.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So like
yeah.
I had to call like Shannon's or whoever, Steve, and yeah. So it's very old school.
Thanks. And I wonder, the other question I had sort of related to that was you talked a little bit about finding new members, and you said something when you were talking, and I have a folder here of a bunch of early what's in Seedbox quizzes, which I'm going to scan up and make available. And but in the front is this thing. It's just a bit of paper here with a letter on the back. So it's clearly the announcement. It's mailed from someone called uh, Emile Jean Horace Vernet, and it's very clearly Paul I believe, sending this out. And it says persons intrigued by and devoted to the Sherlock Holmes canon who may be interested in the formation of a club of like-minded individuals are encouraged to write to Vernet, care of Churchill, and it has his address. It says the club, as yet unnamed, would be open to adult applicants regardless of gender, race, creed, or national origin. Although members are sought primarily from the central Maryland region, all potential applicants are encouraged to write and state their interests, intentions, and preferences for the monthly meeting time and dates. Meetings will consist of a social gathering and dinner, followed by a discussion of one of the 60 sacred writings, which will have been previously announced. The era of gas lamps, Victorian London, hansom cabs, and steam power will live yet again. And then in the back, tucked in this little thing is a tiny bit of handwritten note, it's the 2nd of August, 1989, and it says, "M. Venet, I write in haste to advise that notice of our conspiracy has been duly mailed to the Times, the Courier, the Post Dispatch, and the Howard County Sun. Be advised that our clique henceforth is known as a society, not a club. More follows in Porlock's code. Please advise when annotated is at hand. Your humble servant, Morse Hudson." So clearly written by Steve Clarkson.
Steve,
So,
right?
so I did go on newspapers.com to see if any of them was digitized for that period, and if I could find a newspaper announcement about the club and people expressing interest. And I didn't have any luck finding one yet, but I'm sure I will at some point.
Okay. I don't recall ever contacting a newspaper. Maybe I did. So I imagine Paul was chiefly responsible for getting the word out. Perhaps Steve. Um, yeah, that's quite a nice piece of memorabilia you've got there. I don't know where you got it, but
Yeah,
so like,
I think about 10 years ago, someone compiled all of the quizzes from the early Mycrofts and things like that into a folder, and clearly this was around,
oh,
and it
okay.
was tucked in to put in the front there. So I'm just digitizing it, and then
Yeah,
it'll go back to its owner.
I have the first 4 or 5 Mycroft quizzes. Unfortunately, most of them are the ones that I use to write on. So
Exactly. Yeah.
so they have my answers. I also have 4 or 5 bill of fare brochures, those little menu things that Paul would put together. Yeah, the first 5 or 6 Mycrofts were actually at his house,
Yeah.
and so I think later
Well,
on we moved to the library or something.